Okay.
Right. Okay. So with that, let's start. So Fed, you've seen the job description. Can you please tell us how your experience links or matches with the job description, please?
So, just to give you a background of my work experience and education, in terms of the education, I'm a PMP certified and obviously a graduate in IT plus business. So I can bring from a foundational perspective both mix of a business and IT, and also a project management exposure as well. On the other hand, from a work experience perspective, I have a wide range of work experience dealing with multi-million dollar projects, right from the start, going through all the stages from initiation, planning, execution till closure, and also have a wide experience of building up a business case, working on a project charter, and then moving into the planning stage, doing all the work breakdown structure and determining the approach for the procurement process, going through all the RFP stages, and then doing all the implementation and testing, and then also managing the change. This can be proved or through my wide of years of experience in Telenor, in SAS Water. I can give you an example of SAS Water where I worked on a project, a large wide-scale project where I was responsible as a project manager for the implementation of CRM, HR solution, and project portfolio management as well. So there are other solutions as well, just to give you a brief flavor of it. So over there, I was responsible for going through all stages of the project, including a business case, project charter, planning, breaking down the work structure, forming a team, helping the team to deliver the first stage of the project, which is the conference room pilot one, testing, and then also involved in the training as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. That's okay for me. Rahul, do you have anything else you want to ask on that?
No, I'm good for now, Ian. Please go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about scope, because project scope can be quite difficult. One of the biggest problems with projects is that they've got you, the captive project manager, and this is what we want, and you agree what you're going to do. Great, away you go. And then they say, oh, can we just change this and can we just change that? So basically, can you describe or can you give me an example where you've had to deal with scope creep and how you managed it?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously from a best practices perspective, you don't get into the scope creep. That's the thing as a project manager you need to avoid. But it can be a scenario where it's critical and you don't have any choice. So I can give you an example out in my project with SAS Water, where obviously a large scale implementation happened, covering the CRM, the project management module, and the other stuff. So I will not say a scope creep that the way I addressed it, because we need to be very mindful when we're doing a scope creep. It has an implication on the cost from a perspective because we already locked with the vendor. So what we did is that, keeping in mind the rationale behind normally the scope creep is, I know I'm taking an assumption here, but the scope creep is normally when client does, or our internal client obviously, does not understand the requirement or the need of him, and then he see the solution most of the time later on, and then he realize, oh, I need this, I missed this. So we try to adopt the approach within the project that there are different stages within the project where we can incorporate the scope. Like for example, we encouraged earlier prototyping. There was a prototype or a demo stage within the project where the vendor can demo, and then if there is any requirement need to be, any additional need to be addressed, then we can address that from the client perspective. And then there's another stage called conference room pilot one for the first round of the testing. So
Yeah.
you have it hands-on. So there are two occasions where we try to reduce that scope creep to help our internal client, provide that clarity, just to help them out to reduce or to avoid the scope creep. But there is an occasion where that happened, even despite of the fact we gone through those stages. So there were two requirements, which I can give you an example out. One was uh, within the HR, they want a sort of a, they started pushing us to, because we changed the, okay, because we have a directive from the government side. So it just come from the government. So they made some changes to the performance management, model,
Yeah.
basis on the go, which there was no, when we did the first two stages, like till the CRP1, there was no clear picture of that. So they did it on the assumption that so it will follow the same method. But when we got into the testing stage 2, they got some directive. So they end up making changes to those, to the overall performance criteria.
Yeah.
And then that's where the flexibility within the system does not exist. So vendor was asking us, because I'm making a changes, it's not a configurable changes. So I'm asking you to, he asking for a change request, and that's, we don't have any choice. So we end up taking that implications to the steering committee. So that's the other way we try to address it, like so to give them the change value perspective and those sort of stuff, where we don't have any choice. It is forced on us. But there are other scenarios, sort of a wish list. Okay, why we are not getting a mobile application for the time entry, for example, because there's a HTML5 compatible browser version. So what they were saying is that, oh, why we are not getting a mobile application? It's easier to key in the time entry.
So can I just stop you there, Fahd? So are you sort of describing to me now a project that you've managed that had a complex scope, or
Yes.
was it just the fact that this was something where your client thought they were getting A, but in actual fact what they asked you to deliver was B? They're two different things.
No, they were, yeah. So it's just like, what happened was that they are getting A, and that's
Yeah.
what the understanding is, what the
Yeah.
requirement is. But
Yeah.
from the go, the things changed.
Right.
And now they are looking into A plus B.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it.
Okay.
The original plan was to see it A, and
Yeah.
now they moved, because certainly after 3 months, the time changed. So when they performed the CRP1 and also when they performed the demo, so they were sort of at a stage where that requirement wasn't there, and now that requirement came up.
Okay.
And now,
So
yeah.
if I can just, sorry, because I'm interrupting you for two reasons. Number one, I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah.
And number two, I'm trying to rattle you. I am trying to do that. Okay? Because I would be failing you. In fact, both Rahul and I would be failing you if we didn't try and put you under some pressure. Yeah? And that's the only reason. It's not being horrible, but it's trying to help you. So you've talked about the scope changing, the scope creep, and that's fine. So, and as you rightly pointed out, there would be an implication on budget.
Yep.
And one thing in my experience is that nobody ever likes to sign off more money. They all want to pay for 10 things but get 20 delivered. Mm-hmm. So have you ever faced that situation then, where there's been scope creep or there's been changes, but your stakeholders did not want to approve the budget increases? Have you ever had that, and how did you deal with it?
Oh yes, that's a standard across every organization. When it's come to the budget, nobody would like to increase the budget, isn't it? And this is where sometimes it helped from a perspective of not having a scope creep. Sometimes it's very clear where, as a project manager, I can address it. But if if the requirement creates value, a sort of a business case, which is resulting in a value, which can help from the product perspective, I try to bring in the senior management from a steering committee.
Yeah.
That's we end up established within this project by establishing a project governance. So that helps sometimes. So I see a value uh, of that. I mean, obviously we discourage and then ask them, oh, once we finish the rollout, then you can ask for that scope creep.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
not become a scope creep; it's just more like a change request, isn't it? But on the other hand, where we see, okay, this is a value, let's take it to the stakeholder, because then they will bring in different dynamics to it, and it's more organization-wide thing, isn't it? Like if some, I mean, that's normally what we, I mean, it's normal, and this is what we have in place in our organization, that there were VPs part of that steering committee. So they were, when they are making decisions, they are more looking from a organization-wide perspective instead of a director level, where maybe he's more lean towards or focused toward his own unit for which he has the target. So that sometimes addressed. So that even helped us for the performance one, because this is a scope creep we faced. We took it to the steering committee, and steering committee said, okay, it's important, but there's a workaround available. Let's not do it. Let's not go for the rollout because there's a cost implication. Let's go what we have in place, and then we're going to make a change to it. So at one moment, Director HR was pushing for it, and we see a value for doing it. But taking a call as a project manager for me was from a stakeholder management perspective, I thought that is tricky. So it's better for me just to make sure that we have the right information, information about the budget, help him out, application of the timeline, help him out in terms of this from a system perspective, working with the vendor, and then took it to the steering committee just to make sure that yeah, they have the information to make a decision.
All right, fair enough. Thank you. Ruhul, do you have anything that you want to say?
Yeah, so Fed, so let's think about a situation that you join us and we assign you a large project. Yeah, let's say it's somewhere of the tune to, let's say, £1 million, or something similar, that level of budget. And what all measures would you put in place so that you have a tight control on the budget and you don't overrun? Proactively, what all will you do to make sure that your project doesn't go beyond the budget?
Oh, yeah, it's it's an interesting question. Obviously, from a budget perspective, it's always hard when it's come to the budget. The main thing you can do is, and that's what I learned throughout, is that you have to make sure that you understand what the client is looking for. What the internal, if it's an internal client, it's a large vehicle complex, is what they're looking for. Because it's important from a perspective that until you don't understand it, you will not able to give a right cost estimation or try to budget it. So that's important even to before even get to the monitoring and controlling stage of the project, like where you could start controlling the budget by making the maybe using different techniques, like, okay, so you break it down to work breakdown structure and then make sure that you track the cost at that level, and also make sure that you are not running over it by using those top down and the bottom up approach, just to make sure that you have the experts estimation. But for me, the most important thing is the understanding the customer need, because if you don't understand it, you end up missing something. And if you end up missing something down the line, it will come back and pinch you. So it's important that you use both top down, bottom up approaches just to get that get understanding, and then come up with the work breakdown structure, and then monitor the cost there on the go.
Right, and I take it that you have experience in working with finance department to sort
Yes.
of track the budget. How do you track it? Do you track weekly, monthly? How do you go about it?
It's monthly.
Right.
So we have obviously all the purchasing request, and I mean they assign a project number. So we track a capital cost against that number, isn't it?
Yeah.
That there is any purchasing request or any expense will be tracked against that particular reference number. Just to
Right.
give and then all the time is entered against that number. So you can then get the figure just saying, okay, how much time we put it in, and that will turn into our cost. And then also all the purchasing or the expenses done against the project.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Fed. Thanks for that. Ian, over to you, please.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask you if you know how to do a project plan, because with all these letters after your names, I would have thought you've done that quite a few times. But so I've given you, just imagine that I've given you a project. Yeah. So we have this project, and I've given you the scope that I want, and I've told you that you can have X number of resource. Yeah. So there's at least one resource that covers every area, be it finance or the technical side, whatever. Yeah. So you've got all that. So how would you start to go about defining your project schedule? Yeah. And how do you track it? Because there's two questions in one. What do you do if one of your critical path, a part of the critical path is going wrong? Yeah. So you've got a task, a critical path task that then starts to push time out, which clearly will affect the rest of the project. So how do you do your project schedule, and how do you manage basically something that goes wrong?
Okay, so to answer the first one, where obviously how I'm going to approach the project in order to build up the plan. I mean, before getting into, obviously, I need to build up a sort of as soon as I get some sort of scope, I have to make sure that I have a budget for that. And
Yeah.
there's a budget locked in the project. So if that require, in order to even kick off in most of the organization, and I came across, like in my case, that we have to build up a project charter to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do that. But for doing that, I have to sit with the team. Like if it's a one resource, and then sometimes that one resource is not enough, I have to go back and negotiate with the project sponsor just to determine that, and then plus also have a more understanding with the sponsor what the sponsor is looking for in terms of the project, and then breaking it down. Maybe at that point I will not get into a nitty-gritty of the project. I have to determine the steps, like okay, what we mean when where we are. Maybe that even we have the scope. The scope is too high level. We need to still come up with the business case or with that approach. So we have to define the stages of it. Like okay, any governance model stages within the plan.
Yep.
And on the basis of my input from the team and maybe any historical approach we did for that particular project in the organization and other organization, on that basis we can define timelines. Like okay, one of them can be expression of interest will not be wrapped up in a week. We have to have a month or two, because we engage with the vendors to do market research and those sort of stuff. And then that will help to us determine a plan, and then it will evolve along the way as soon as we have more information. That it will help us. So that's the answer of the first part. Sorry, just can you highlight what the second part was?
Sure. So throughout any project, one has a critical path.
Oh yes,
and there are tasks on that critical path, and Sod's law says one of them is going to go wrong.
Oh yes. So normally, what we do is that we build up some contingency against that to address that. And the other way, if it's going wrong, the way we address it is that if somehow we can run parallel to some other task, if there are two resources, like for example, if one resource is working on one particular task and the other resource is working on task B, so that's one way. Like we did it in our, throughout my career. I can give you an example of SaaS Water, because CRM is driven by one team, because then mainly the team was from, there were some cross-functional team members, but they were from business development mainly, who were more directly engaging with the customer.
Yep.
So we were running that part with them. And on the other
Yep.
hand, HR was more focused on the HR side. So there were tasks which are running parallel. So we thought, okay, and obviously there can be obviously there will be a scenario where we are running in a critical path, and those tasks will be sequential. Like, okay, one task A will be finishing if I talk about. I mean, you can. What I'm
So
saying
let me,
is
Fud, let me stop you there, because what you're now talking about is risk management.
yes.
Yeah, which is fine. So what sort of risk management procedures then have you used in the past that you find work for you?
It's just from a risk management perspective, I will say, I think we need to keep the thing simple here, is that there should be some mitigation plan in place, and then there will be ownership of that. And then if there is any additional, I mean, whatever the probabilities, it need to be transparent across the organization, and even within the steering committee or within the management as well. Like, I mean, example is that in Telenor and I worked on an order management system.
Yeah.
And the risk, when we picked up the vendor, one risk we mentioned to them was that, okay, they have a strength in development and in other respect, but when it's come to a particular business domain, they don't have that expertise they're going to bring into the organization. So we may need to hire a consultant to do that at some point. We may end up.
Okay, so you're now starting to look at, because you're going to have to call in other resource, which happens on projects. That will necessitate a change request of some sort, whether it be a change request for more money because of this or
no,
whatever.
I mean, the way we addressed it, that it wasn't a change request. It was more like a contingency money put into the project. We may end up using it or not using it, but the money was there. So what happened was that we determined the probability, which was more at that time it was low, but then we want to show the risk to them, and then the cost to the risk, like, okay, so there will be like a $70,000 cost to hire a consultant for a month.
Yeah.
For, I mean, obviously not full-time month. It will be like engaging for around like a week or 2 weeks time period, or 3 weeks company, and then the cost will be there, and it will be during the designing stage, and then maybe it will be during the execution or testing stage as well, like to make sure that what we design will work as well, and then how he can help us out. So there were different aspects. Just come up with the mitigation for that, and then build up a cost. Like, okay, that's what was built into the project plan, and then later on we end up realizing it, using it, but then it was more as a cost which is built into the project instead of a change request.
Okay, so let's talking about change requests, which you weren't and I was, which is very nice of me. If I was the business sponsor and I keep changing my mind, because we're talking about scope as well, which then necessitates, I agree with you, we're going to have change requests. Any project that starts to get too many change requests starts to meander, starts to get lost. Yeah. I mean, it's not rocket science. It does. How would you bring me back on track? Yeah. So I'm a project sponsor, and I keep coming up with something different every other day. How would you sort of turn around to me and say, look, sorry about this, Ian, but we need to think about exactly what it is that you're trying to get at. How would you manage me?
Yeah, I mean, there are two steps I normally take. One is that visibility from a perspective of giving an understanding of the implication of the timelines and budget. So that's purely from and the other aspect is the people. So if you, I mean, obviously you're a sponsor. Like, I mean, I can give an example in case of the time to market is one, and then the other is the client expectation. Like, okay, give an example. that CRM or that implemented in my current organization. So, so their expectation is that will be implemented in November or December. So there is a high expectation they will get the tool, they will utilize it, make their life easy.
Yep.
But if you keep on coming up with the scope creep or with the, oh, sorry, change request, not scope creep here. So it will result in some timing issues
Mhm.
on the project, and it will frustrate people as well. So it's not purely about the budget and the timeline. Maybe you can live with it as a sponsor, but it's also about people. So people are the client which you are trying to address the need for, and it will result in frustration on their end. And then if they don't get the solution, let's break it down and try to deliver what we can, and then later on address those change requests if it's not something to do with anything critical or
And that's fine.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, but that's fine. As I said, I'm not going to be nice to you. Right, so that's great. But so I'm a real pain. Yeah, I'm really kind of awkward. So you've done. How do you? How would you be able to keep your cool? I mean, what would you do to maintain your professional approach towards me? Because I'm just awkward and difficult.
Yeah, go for a cup of coffee, isn't
Yeah.
it? maybe my sponsor is interested in soccer or football, and he's a Man United fan, isn't it? So maybe I will start talking about him to calm him down.
Are you a Man United fan?
My brother is not. I'm not a big fan of Man United. So, but then my brother is. Not, I mean, at the moment they are not up to the mark from his point of view. He's turning into a Liverpool fan.
Okay. All right. So what you're saying is, I believe, and I am putting words in your mouth, and if you think they're wrong, tell me. You try and find a different route using a more personal approach. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So I think there are different stages. I have to understand from where the sponsor is coming from.
Yeah.
That's the rationale behind it. So get more information. Then maybe I address his need or his concern or his requirement without even formally getting into like all that project methodology. It's all about communication, isn't it? All about people. So if that can be addressed there,
Oh,
and then
someone's frozen here. Don't know whether it's me or someone else.
yeah, and the second part is that if that cannot be addressed, that there, and then keeping in mind he's a project sponsor, he's not any other stakeholder, because I have to influence and check that influence and map it.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, I really want my sponsor on my side, isn't it? As a project manager, there's no other option
True.
I have from a sponsor perspective. So,
True.
so if I cannot address it, that's where the project governance is come into play. So I've used all my steps, like work offline, formally, to see how we can address that. But if there is anything which as a project manager I cannot control, I will facilitate. I will get into a facilitate mode because I want my project sponsor on my side. I cannot.
So you're talking about communication.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Now,
yeah.
I know that my colleague Rahul likes to talk about communication, so I'm going to pass over to Rahul.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, for that. So I think you're absolutely right, Fed, in terms of communication is the key, right? So we here basically rely a lot on communication planning and how do you go and execute that. So can you please give me an example? Actually, there are two questions that I really want to check with you. One, can you give me an example where you faced an issue in a project which was due to poor communication or lack of communication? That's number one. And secondly, have you actually prepared a communication plan yourself? And what sort of content typically, or how do you approach a communication plan, please?
Okay, so the first is where it went poorly. Yeah. So I worked on a third-party integration in Telenor. So where I worked. So I just at that time I joined the organization.
Right.
So and I was just settling down as a project manager there.
Right.
And then when I got the project was handed over to me, and there was a pressure on time to market, like, oh, we need to roll out, we need to integrate, and it's a third party service called value added service, so they want to roll it out. Oh, let's be quick, let's roll it out. So there was no like, okay, I got the plan and everything, and and that's my mistake at my end because I was new to the place, and then I was in the assumption place that the stakeholders are already aligned on it. So even the marketing team who is putting the pressure on us, like, okay, there's a time to market, there's a time to market, whether they understand the implication and the project, or they simply think, okay, just a plug in and plug in into some box, and then it will be all application is ready on the vendor end or the third party end. So the way value added service work is that you have a vendor, they integrate a service with us, and through the telecom, you provide a service, uh, additional service to the client. Uh, it was just to give an example. It's a mobile advertisement platform. So you integrate, you install an app. If you earn a minute for a customer, if you see some advertisement, and the sponsor will give you a bundle of 5 minutes if you, because it works on a point structure. Like you end up watching some advertisement videos and those sort of stuff. So as a customer, you will get some, you subscribe into the service and you get some bundle of, as a pay as you go customer, you
Right.
get 10 minutes or some text messages to use
Right.
it, or an internet, like a
Right.
500 MB that. So that's the product was. So, so I moved into it with the assumptions, but later on when I sat with the team, have some discussion, I realized that that's not the case. So they don't even know the implication, and then they're just putting the pressure for the sake of putting the pressure on the time to market. It's just like, okay, they have in their minds sitting that, okay, there's another organization, Zong, who's going to implement it. Let's do it before them.
But
Uh,
do you really think this is a communication gap, or this is just, I think they have a desire to go really fast at it, and it's sort of manage those expectations versus. Sorry, I was just trying to be trying to understand any example you can give me where you've faced as a project manager an issue because of communication lack. Maybe somebody has not spoken to somebody, and that has caused a big deal in your project. So, do- is there something
this
that?
is Yeah, this is one of the example. Or I can give an example of another project as well, like where the, I mean, anyhow, this is, I think it's an communication example from a you know, because they have the wrong expectation at their end, that they are going to get the product, and from that perspective, and they don't understand like the integration parts of the project. But there is another example where an upgrade happened, and what we were doing was that we are there's a Power Builder app, old app, like built on a development environment, and an upgrade was happening,
Right.
and there were gaps from a perspective that no, because there was no communication between a BA who was preparing a test scripts
Right.
and the subject matter expert.
Right.
So when we got to the stage where we supposed that the test script is ready,
Right.
there was no quality check done. That
Okay.
they never interacted with each other. So on the basis of the old manuals, the BA ended up preparing it and send the draft out, and then and this is where the implications were. Uh, so that's what I learned because I was new to the organization. So I learned to encourage those collaboration efforts, just to make sure that even if in a status meeting, BA kept on saying that, okay, oh, I'm having an engagement with them, just to make sure that I get a feedback from the subject matter experts as well, just to have to formalize or open a communication channel with them
Okay.
on,
Right.
depending upon their involvement. So that's where it leads to the second part as well, from a communication plan perspective, that uh, just to list down all the stakeholder or the team member within the project. I mean, stakeholder, I mean like all the subject matters. I mean, obviously they're representing their department, and on that basis, determining the frequency, like what sort of an involvement I need to have. If it's
Right.
a non-core team member, maybe I will say to myself, like, if I have a bi-weekly, after every fortnight, after every 2 weeks, I mean by that, I can have a meeting. But in case where those subject matters, I mean, I can give an example of that upgrade where there are members from the finance which are critical for me from the perspective of the project. So maybe twice in a week, having a discussion with them, and it can be informal or formal, having a formal status meeting weekly, and then also going to their maybe room, which is now COVID, so maybe not possible, but then
Right.
doing it through Teams or Zoom, just to have those interaction going to understand, okay, are they going to get like an example of that, to address that they obviously at that time they didn't get the script to provide their input not ample time, so that resulted in implication on the timeline. So
Okay.
now this time I was more like, okay, now I have to be more proactive. So I may end up now at this stage of my life, I will be already know that that is not even before
Sure.
getting the deliverable that they did not provide the input yet. So I will encourage the BA even to send a draft to them
Right.
just
Right.
to see where they are. So it's
Makes
just a continuous feedback loop, and then it will change from one perspective. A member who's not involved and who's not getting impacted from that task script, from that test script, maybe he want a communication after a month saying, okay, where the project is, but he's not interested in a day-to-day basis of the
right.
project.
Right.
So the
Okay.
communication plan will be worked accordingly.
Yeah. Thanks, Fed, for that. Yeah. Okay, Ian, do you want to ask any other?
Yeah, so we're coming very close to the end now. So I'm going to ask you to be very concise in your answer. One of the big things that keeps coming out for the job description is about people management, leadership, because this is obviously a senior position, and which is great. How would you deal with people, the assassins on a project? Because you always get them, the people that don't want to play ball, or will say to your face they do, but behind your back they don't, and you know it. How would you deal with them? And would you be prepared to hire and fire? And how would you deal with that? Very quickly, very briefly.
Yeah. So the quick one is I worked with the team and managed the team as a senior one there in Telenor. I was responsible for the team. So
Yeah.
the approach was so depending upon what stage of the person is new to the team, or is sometime those challenges are not due to his attitude. It's more only due to he's new to the organization. He just need to learn the techniques and those sort of stuff. So it's more about at that stage you need to mentor and coaching them.
Yeah.
And the other way around is that which I this commonly I faced in the project is that sometimes if you give the responsibility to the member, they excel, they perform well as compared to you just and give them more visibility. Leave them to make those decisions, or they get into a mode where they think, oh, they are creating a value, they are responsible for doing it. So that helps sometimes to address those performance issues. The third is that if you already done you provided them the necessary tools, and this is where I believe that you took the steps, and now there's an attitude issues which is coming into play where, okay, they are doing things, but they are not doing things.
Yeah.
So you try to address them as by increasing that's again that value part is increasing their visibility to the people to see, and having those one-to-one coaching or mentoring session with them. But then that will not address, that's where you bring in sometime in the worst case scenario. Luckily, I never faced it till this time, that you get into a scenario where you have to involve the HR, and then you need to work with them just to make sure that the person understand. If you already communicate, obviously you kept on communicating to them in the worst case scenario about the implication of that. But if he doesn't understand, then you need to bring in HR to make sure that he understands the HR policies as well. If that will not work, then I think even maybe that we can determine a way, maybe move to some other unit where he can excel on his strength basis, or maybe end up leaving the organization. But luckily, I was not in the scenario where I have to do that. Just to be true, it addressed on the first steps, like, okay, the transparency and value sometimes help to address that.
All right.
Okay, I think just a last question really. We did have lots of questions to ask you, Fed, but I think this will be the last question that I would like to ask before we sort of wrap up this interview. So hypothetically, if I give you a donkey, yeah, to sell to a beggar, right? So you got a donkey, you have to sell it to a beggar. What would you say to him to entice him to go and buy it? And he's a beggar, you know what I mean? He doesn't have money, so you got to really entice him. So what would you say?
But still create a value for him from a mobility perspective, isn't it?
Right.
So he doesn't need to he need to go from one place to another. Then he can sit on him and then maybe go from one place to another. So there is a value for the beggar as well for having a donkey. And
Right.
maybe sometimes he's asking for money instead of asking for himself, ask for a donkey. Sometimes it will help because
Right.
people will maybe brand him as a beggar, but still give him money out from
Right.
from a donkey perspective. Uh, so
Right.
it's just like the value. I think it's just the benefit you end up selling to him that will work. Uh, Maybe the worst case scenarios you need to. I don't want to do that, but then you need to demonstrate him, showcase him, like how it can help him to get more money.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Um, okay. Right. So I think we are to the end of the session. We've taken roughly 45 minutes. So take a deep breath now, Fed. We are. I think we will carry on.